Welcome back. All right, so it's been a while since I did a Hockey 101 video. So I want to talk about this, and this is basically geared towards people who might be new fans to the game. That being said, I'm sure that regular fans of the game will be in here as well, talking about calls and what does or doesn't get called. And I've got my road hockey stick here just in case I need it, which I might for some of these. So I'll just go through the list. We can all go through the list. I'll talk about which ones I think are pretty consistently called, ones that consistently aren't called, and all that fun stuff. And I'm wearing the referee's jersey because what else am I going to wear when I'm talking about penalties? So we'll start with holding. Now, there was a time in the game where if you wanted to grab a guy's jersey because he's getting by you a little bit too fast and kind of pull him back a little bit, that didn't get called. It didn't get called very much. That was in the late 90s, early 2000s. It kept some, shall we say, not very mobile players in the game, especially on the blue line. And the NHL cracked down on that coming out of the 2004 2005 wiped out lockout season. They changed the rules and they got rid of holding for the most part. It still happens. There's still times a guy will grab a jersey, referee doesn't see it or barely and doesn't get called. Hooking is very similar. So hooking, and this is where you'll need your stick. You put your stick around the player and you hook them. It's that simple. And so see, and without the stick, nobody'd have any idea what that might look like. But hooking is a penalty that the consistency may not be there, but if they call a hook, it is, it's sort of like when you're out on stage and you're bombing and you see that cane coming out to pull you off. Yeah, that's a hook. It is a penalty. They don't call it at comedy clubs because nobody does that at comedy clubs anymore. But hooking, are there even comedy clubs anymore? Anyways, hooking and holding are two of those obstruction calls that they started calling a lot more in 2005, along with interference. Now, interference is difficult. So the player that does not have the puck, you are not allowed to get in the way of the player who does not have the puck. You can't really throw a body check either on a player who is without possession of the puck without risking interference. Because, again, the player doesn't have the puck. They have the right to be where they are on the ice. You have the right to be where you are on the ice. If two players collide, that's just a collision. But if one player goes out of his way to kind of... And I always use it as like setting a pick. So that's like a football term, a basketball term. You kind of pick, oh, look, there's all this wide open field. Oh, look, you've got a wide open court to make the layup. It's a similar thing where players will sometimes interfere with another so that their teammate has a pretty clear path to the net. That's when those ones should be called every time. I'm saying should be because there's almost no penalty in the NHL, which is called 100% of the time, and so fans will get upset. Tripping is a dicey one, and it's very simple, right? Tripping can be with your foot, it can be with your stick as well. There are times where a penalty might be called a trip, where actually the player steps on the other guy's stick. So you can't skate on a stick, so you're going to fall over. And it may be a situation where the player who stepped on the stick is really the one who probably should have been more careful where they were going, and the player that gets called for tripping wasn't necessarily, guilty of the foul, but referees will call that. The game is played very, very fast, so I totally understand why, when we look at the replay at frame by frame, we go, well, that shouldn't have been called a trip. I get why referees look, they see a guy go down in the corner, and there's, somebody right there with their stick in the area, and you call the trip. I get why they do it, understandable, but again, those are ones that on replay people will tear apart. Boarding is one of the more dangerous plays in the game. Basically, if you see the numbers on the back of a jersey, you are not supposed to hit the player. Now, where it gets interesting is you have checking from behind and boarding, and I think you could probably meld those into one penalty. Because checking from behind is not always along the boards, I understand, but again, boarding is kind of a check from behind as well. Now, some of these can be called 5 minutes. You can get a 5-minute trip if they decide there's intent to injure. Intent to injure is one of those kind of nebulous terms, right? Because as soon as they say intent to injure, the player who's getting thrown out of the game for intending to injure the other player, the fans of that team may have an opinion on that. Along the line of, yeah, that's a penalty, but there was no intent. And intent is tough because you're basically saying we believe that the player was thinking this during said play, And again, trying to read a player's mind, that's kind of tricky. So charging is here. Now, charging is one people discuss. And it's the number of steps you take before throwing a hit. It can also be that you leave your feet on a hit. There are plenty of times that a player leaves his feet on the ice on a hit that I don't necessarily think it's an awful, horrible play. Some guys just kind of jump into checks, but that can get called for charging. Again, this can get called as a board too. Maybe there's not enough steps. I think the steps are 5 strides or 4 strides or something along those lines, number of strides. And I say something like that because it's not called that consistently. And the reason being, I don't know that referees are standing there going 1, 2, 3, 4, and he checked him. That's a charge. 1, 2, 3, and he. Nope, that's not. I don't think anybody's necessarily counting him. And again, distance traveled is something they look at, but I really think it's a spur of the moment. That to me is a charge. That to me is not. There's always going to be subjectivity behind it. This is why when people talk about well, if we could automate it, you can't automate penalties. You can automate a strike zone in baseball, sure. You might be able to automate some penalties in some areas. Some of these penalties you could have, I don't know, I guess AI figuring it out. But until AI figures out how many fingers there are on a hand, we might not want to hand them over anything else. But yeah, charging is one of those ones people argue about a lot. Clipping is really, really dangerous. Low bridge hits. So the idea you're going to go down, he's in a vulnerable position, and I'm going to clip. I'm going to get under. Maybe I'm going to clip him with the stick. Clipping doesn't get called as clipping very often, but you know it when you see it. And those are plays that, they can be very dangerous considering the speed and the size these players have. When that momentum shifts to the point where you're going down to the ice, that momentum's got to go somewhere, and the ice isn't going to give, but your bones and your muscles might. Elbowing's not as prominent in the game now as it was back in the 80s when I started watching it. Elbowing was pretty common back then, and it wasn't necessarily called that much either. You could get away with some stuff back in the 80s. I do remember. So for now, there are certain penalties that people say, well, yeah, that was a cross-check, but it wasn't that hard, or it wasn't that many, that kind of thing. There were plenty of penalties that were like that back in the 80s because it was a letting them play. You're going to hear that a lot. Referees are just letting them play, meaning what are rules? There was one, I'm trying to remember which playoff game it was that I reviewed, and I was counting off the penalties that were no longer being called. Where I was like, interference isn't a penalty, hooking's not a penalty, holding's not a penalty. Because, and I don't complain about officiating very much, but it was really blatant to me that all of a sudden it was just the Wild West out there and anything goes. And that does happen in the playoffs. So I'm just going to let people know, if you're just getting into hockey, there's going to be times where you say, wait a minute, that was a penalty. It may have been a penalty in the first period. It may not be a penalty in the third period. And it definitely won't be a penalty in overtime. So that's where things get tough. Fighting. So the NHL, one of the few leagues that allows a fight without throwing a guy out of the game. And I say leagues as in sports. There are other leagues, of course, lower level leagues that allow fighting. There are also those that don't. I think it's NCAA. I think you get thrown out of the game for fighting. There's European leagues where you get thrown out of a game for fighting as well, I do believe. But it is part of the game, is what is the argument. I don't have an opinion for or against fighting. I generally don't watch the fights. It's a 5-minute penalty for fighting. If you jump somebody, the idea is then you get the instigator. So you get 2 minutes for instigating the fight, 5 minutes for fighting, and a 10-minute misconduct. So it's 17 minutes in penalties for instigating a fight. The instigator's not called very often, and it's not called very consistently, in my eyes. And that's one penalty I would be fine with them just tossing out in the trash. Headbutting doesn't get called very often. Headbutting is very rare. And when somebody does it, and it's right on TV, and it's right in front of the refs, all fans have the same reaction of, what an idiot. Because it's such a stupid thing to do, so it's very rare. It doesn't happen. Just like biting isn't on the board, because that's kind of under unsportsmanlike conduct. A lot of things are covered under unsportsmanlike conduct. Kicking doesn't get called very often either. It's rare it does happen that you kick at an opponent, but it's very, very rare, and it's very, very dangerous because those skates are sharp. Kneeing is extremely dangerous. Knee on knee isn't on the board. Kneeing is basically covering knee on knee. So when you're out there skating around and you're trying to skate past a defenseman and he throws the knee out to try to make that check, and usually it's a defenseman that's been beaten on the play. So he knows he's been beaten on the play. He's in trouble and he's doing what he feels like he has to do. So he throws the knee out and his knee collides with the knee of the other player. You can destroy a guy's knee doing that. If your knee is locked and you're ready for it and they're not, you can destroy their knee. Now, if your knee's not locked and theirs isn't locked, you're taking a very similar risk. And there have been cases where a player throws the knee, gets the kneeing penalty, and they need some time before they can get up and go over and serve the penalty because they messed up their knee on the play. But it is very, very dangerous. Roughing is a penalty that I find kind of humorous and entertaining because it depends on the referee. It depends on the game. Roughing is the idea of, throwing a couple of punches, but it's not enough to warrant a fight. So there are definitely times, and again, if you're a new fan of the game, there are going to be times where you see guys throw like 4 or 5 punches each, and they get thrown in the box for roughing. And then later on, you might see guys throw 4 or 5 punches each, and they get a fighting call out of it. It is bizarre, and roughing can be called just for like having your gloved hand and just, giving a guy kind of a bop in the head while you're having a bit of a scrum in front of the net. But the standard for roughing just seems to be along the lines of, and if you're striking your opponent, they can call it. Sometimes they don't. There are times where a player will just, haul off and hit somebody. Gloved hand only. If you drop the glove and you throw a punch, you're going to the box. But gloved hand, there's times where you'll hear the referee yelling at them, knock it off, doing the parent voice. Referees in the NHL are basically, they have to use the parent voice. I love it when they do the dad voice. I love when they try to turn on the microphone to, call the penalty, and they're like, no, get in the box. Get over there. You shut up. It's my turn. I'm turning on the microphone, calling the penalty. You go stand over there. You know what you did. Get in the box. So, yeah, referees can be pretty entertaining to watch. Although I'm going to say, too, and this is, again, with the idea this is for new fans, I sometimes feel like the theatrics with officials that Wes McCauley started. So, again, when the game's called by Wes McCauley, he's going to get really animated with how he calls the penalties. And it's entertaining, but I sometimes feel like it's to the detriment of the game. Now that other referees are doing something similar, just tell us what the penalty is. Just tell it, because it's getting to the point now where it feels a little theatrical, and I'm not saying they're all doing it, but there's some, and even Wes on some level, I think the theatrics have made, I don't know that the theatrics have made him a less effective referee, but when you look at the like scouting the refs and referee charts and everything, Wes McCauley's gone from being one of the best to not necessarily being one of the best, and I really hope that this coming season we see that trend reverse. Slew footing is dangerous. So slew footing is basically you get your foot behind the other guy and you pull him down. Again, the reason that this is dangerous, like kneeing and other plays and collisions are dangerous, the player is not expecting it. So the player may not even know that you're there, and the next thing you know, they're on their back on the ice, their feet are in the air, they may fall awkwardly, and a slew foot, when it's delivered, can be one of the most dangerous plays in hockey. It is rough. And if you want to see what dangerous plays in hockey are, I'll throw out there a recommendation of Shoresy, because they do go into some of the more dangerous plays in hockey in the first episode. And they show like video representations of them, and it's Shoresy throwing all of them. He's responsible for all of those penalties, and some of them look pretty brutal. And I'm pretty sure the slew foot was one of the ones they showed in there. Throwing equipment. This would qualify as unsportsmanlike conduct. So if you're on the bench and you take your glove and throw it at somebody on the ice, good chance you're hitting the showers early. It's not a good idea. It's never a good idea to throw your equipment. Also, I'm going to throw in there too, you don't interact with players on the ice when you're on the bench. That can be game ejection, you're gone. And it could be just something as simple as preventing a guy from getting out of your bench when he gets checked into the bench by the other team. Oh, he couldn't get out. Oh, I wasn't holding his stick. Yep. So you're gone. So it's not in the same vein as throwing equipment, but it's not that far off. You're still you're doing something you know you probably shouldn't. A little bit mischievous, and it can be fun on a highlight reel, but I would imagine coaches don't like it very much. You don't want to lose somebody because he took his glove and threw it at somebody, and that kind of thing. Butt ending. Butt ending is very, very dangerous. So butt ending, you get your stick, you're holding your stick, and then butt ending is just that. Butt end of the stick, and you hit somebody with it. It can be accidental. There are times that it can be accidental. You're in close quarters with people. I mean, heck, playing floor hockey and street hockey, there have been times where I accidentally butt end somebody. Sometimes you can get caught up along the boards and butt end yourself and knock the wind out of yourself, and then you're stuck with I don't want to let anybody know that I just did that, so I'm gonna try to run around, but I don't have any ability to breathe. So this is gonna be tough. I might need a mattress. So butt ending is dangerous. That can result in suspension. It can result in being thrown out of the game. Very dangerous penalty. Very dangerous play. Cross-checking. So you come up to cross-checking. I wish this was called as consistently as it was a couple years ago. Cross-checking is basically, again, you've got your stick, you've got it in two hands, and you hit somebody with that stick, usually in the back. Usually you're in the corner. You hit them with the stick. That first cross-check is back to not being called. They got to a point where they were calling cross-checks consistently and right away. And I heard plenty of announcers, usually the color announcers, being like, "Oh, I don't know how that's. I mean, that's a cross-check, but that's usually not bad enough to be a penalty. But it's a cross-check. We can all agree it's a cross-check, which is supposed to be a penalty. This is why it can be tough for people who are first watching the game. You can say, well, wait a minute, it has to be 3 cross-checks before it's a penalty? Yep. And I feel like the game's gone back there, where it's 3 or 4 cross-checks before they call it. We're back to, again, the color announcers being like, well, yeah, those first couple of cross-checks weren't bad, but that third one, that's the penalty there. That's where the arm goes up. I don't, because again, if it's a penalty, it's a penalty. You shouldn't have to do it 3 times for it to be, like, you don't see where, well, he punched you in the head twice, but he didn't punch you in the head the third time, so it's not really roughing. It's so weird. It's so bizarre to me that cross-checking is not called a little more consistently. And when it's called consistently, you see scoring go up, because usually the cross-check is by the defending player, and very often, too, it's trying to clear out the front of the net. So I got a guy in front of the net. I'm having a hard time clearing him out. If I give him a stiff cross-check in the lower back, it might clear out that front of the net. And so as long as you only do it the once, and if you hit the guy in the exact right spot, you get him out of the way, and you don't get a penalty. High sticking is automatic. So high sticking is exactly what the name is. Your stick is above the shoulders, and it clips somebody. Might clip them in the eye, might clip them in the mouth or the teeth or whatever. If it draws blood, it's 4 minutes. I have been very vocal over the years that I don't think drawing blood should decide an injury. There are times where you get cut. You may not even know you've been cut. It may not hurt. May not be a big deal. And then there are times where it hurts like hell and there's no blood. And you feel like you need a minute. You may not be ready to go back into a game, but you didn't get cut. So again, usually the 4 minutes is because there's blood. This is why when somebody gets high stick, you'll see. And they'll do that for a while, and it's like, it's embarrassing. It is. I know why they're doing it. I understand they want to get that 4 minute. There are times where I'm pretty sure they're biting their lip to try to get that blood to come out, and it just looks silly. I think the injury status should be, all right, that was a pretty rough one. He looks pretty rattled. It's 4. But again, if you start doing that, this is where we'll get to embellishment. Slashing, again, pretty basic. The slash, they'll call the slash on the hands every time. So as a player's going to the net, again, the defending player might be out of position, might be a little bit slower than the guy he's checking, and he'll bring the stick up. And you'll try to catch the stick. So if you can interfere with their stick so they can't get the shot off, you're good. If you interfere with the stick and you hit them in the hand, it's going to be a penalty. You're going to go to the box. And that's the Sidney Crosby rule. Sidney Crosby threw a slash that they never called as a penalty, but it lopped off the tip of the finger of Mark Mathot back in the day. And soon after that, they changed the rule. And they started making it so any kind of slashing to the hands was automatically called. And again, it feels like that's allowed some more goals to happen. So who knows? We'll see whether or not slashing continues to be called every single time it's a hit to the hands. And again, you're going to have color announcers. Color announcers are usually former NHLers, played in an era where that was allowed, and they will tell you constantly that that was allowed, and in their era, that wouldn't have been a penalty. Do not make a drinking game out of it during a hockey game. You're going to end up in the hospital. Spearing is pretty obvious. Spearing and butt ending are very similar in that they're just wild antics with your stick. Spearing, it's not great. And spearing, it doesn't have to be the butt end, obviously. And very often when they call spearing, it's because you get them right between the legs. Yes, players wear cups. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt when you get hit in the sensitive area that males would rather not get hit. Not that females want to get hit there either. That's generally not something they want either. But yeah, spearing is dangerous. And if a spear is called, it very often is 5 in a game. So 5 and then 10-minute misconduct. You get penalized, as in you have to kill a penalty for the 5 minutes. 10-minute misconducts do not lead to a man advantage. That's been the case in the NHL dating back to, I think it was the 1930s. Before that, I think it did, but yeah. Anyways, delay of game, very simple, right? Delay of game can be a few different ways. They wanted to make it so that if a goalie intentionally knocks the net off, that it's delay of game, but alter it a little bit and it feels like it was the Matt Murray rule. They never did change it. But yes, if a goaltender turns around and, there's this chaos going on in front of the net, and he's like, well, if I push the net off, then we get a whistle. That's delay of game. But if I, as a defending player, get the puck and I throw it up over the glass, it cannot touch the glass. If it does not touch the glass and it goes over into the crowd, then it's a delay game penalty. If it goes into the team's bench, it might be a delay game penalty, depending on how high the puck was. At the point where it would have cleared the glass, it's only in your defending zone. If a player in the offensive zone puts the puck over the glass, there is no penalty. If it deflects out off a defenseman's stick, there's no penalty either. It is simply if you try to physically play the puck and you throw it over the glass. It can't hit the boards. It can't hit the glass. If it hits the boards and clears the glass, it is not a delay game penalty. They've changed the rules so that can be challenged when it's called. I don't know how many coaches are going to want to challenge it, because then you're down 5-on-3 in the event that you challenge it and it doesn't work. So you get delay a game basically for fighting a delay a game call, because an unsuccessful challenge is basically a delay game penalty. Embellishment. I'm not a fan of embellishment, because to me, if there's a foul that's called on the play, there's a foul that's called on the play. If a guy falls down a little bit easy, whatever. But if there's a penalty, there's a penalty. But the embellishment is very often used to make it 4-on-4. We saw a lot in the playoffs. We see it somewhat during the regular season, where, let's say, a guy takes an elbow, but he does this really theatrical dive when he takes the elbow to alert the referee to what happened. The referee can call the elbow and then call the embellishment as well. It's also diving is also the terminology for it. The NHL, every now and then, will give out a fine for diving. I don't think we had a fine for embellishment this year. I don't think we did. Where they'll basically come out, it's like a public shaming thing. We're fining this player for embellishment. They won't tell you what play. It's just basically his body of work is embellishment, and we want to make it stop. So I don't remember seeing that fine being handed out this season. Illegal substitution is when a player leaves the penalty box early, which should never happen. The penalty box attendant usually pretty good on that, and that shouldn't take place, but there's times where an illegal substitution will happen. And it may be that there's 2 seconds left in the penalty and the guy's just, really anxious. The door opens and he steps on the ice before he's allowed. So the guy stepping onto the ice before he's allowed gets to go back to the box for another 2 minutes for illegal substitution. And then we get to goalie interference. And the number one penalty that's debated all the time in the National Hockey League circles, and it's both media and fans, is goalie interference. You cannot interfere with a goalie. In the event that a goal is scored, it can come back if the NHL feels like the goaltender was not able to reset to make a save after being interfered with, and or if a player is in the crease and just making it so that the goaltender can't make the play. It should not be called in some of the cases where it has been, and it should be called in some of the cases it hasn't been. It can be challenged. Very often it's challenged. The NHL has a pretty interesting guideline with this. Basically, if the contact occurs within the crease, you have a much better chance of it being called goalie interference. If the contact's outside the crease, you have a much better chance of the goal counting. The NHL has kind of modified this a little bit. They don't want goals coming off the board so much. So goalie interference, it feels like they've allowed a little bit more over the last 12 months than what they did before. But again, it's something we argue about a lot. It will get talked about a lot during this season. If you watch a play and you go, I don't understand, was that goal interference? Was it not? You're right there with a lot of hockey fans. And it's something I tried to do videos on and talk about, but that confusion is still out there. Leaving the bench, pretty self-explanatory. You don't leave the bench if you're not supposed to. That's a big no-no. So like there's a fight going on the ice and you decide I want to get out there and get involved. Maybe the star player on the team is in a bad way and you feel like, oh, somebody's got to get out there and protect them. So somebody big and strong gets on the ice, but for leaving the bench, it's a penalty and it can lead to suspension. Too many men on the ice can be a confusing penalty because usually during a line change there will be 6 or 7 players for a team on the ice within a very small area at the bench. So the trick is this. You'll have 6 or 7 guys on the ice within, I think it's like 3 feet of the bench. They kind of allow that. However, when the puck goes near the boards and you're doing a line change, all of the players will generally leave that puck alone. So they will allow for there to be a couple extra guys on the ice and won't call the penalty. But if one of the guys leaving the ice or one of the guys coming on plays the puck as the puck goes by the boards, then they're going to call the penalty because then you're getting the advantage of a player who's leaving the play or joining the play, playing the puck when they probably aren't supposed to. So smart teams will kind of shoot it near the boards of the other team during a line change. You do see that happen, and that's what they're looking for. They're looking for that too many men. You're also going to see games where you hear players start yelling and pointing, too many. Yeah. Or they'll just throw their stick in the air and yell, hey, and then point at the other bench, which works. I saw a couple of cases this year where players start yelling and pointing, and the officials go, yeah, no, that's a penalty. So the arm goes up to indicate a penalty. Unsportsmanlike conduct is such a vast, wonderful cornucopia of things. It might be that you swore, you said the wrong words. It might be that you're ornery. They can't get you off the ice. You're being a general pain. At that point, too, they can call a 10-minute misconduct or a game misconduct to get you out. Misconducts are handed out, and late in a game, if it's an ugly game and there's been a lot of, if every whistle you're seeing guys pushing and shoving and taking punches at each other, officials get tired of it, and eventually they'll just start throwing guys out. So you'll get the unsportsmanlike conduct, and you'll get a game misconduct. What also happens is, so talking about how like on a whistle you'll see 5 or 6 guys all like along the boards, all yelling at each other and pushing each other, maybe they're grabbing onto each other. At times, the referee will let them know, knock it off, and when they don't, they'll grab one guy out of the pile for unsportsmanlike conduct, and they intentionally grab one guy. So somebody gets a power play, and that causes that to kind of stop. If officials want to keep control of a game that looks like it's getting to that boiling point and there's going to be a bunch of fighting, hand out an unsportsmanlike conduct during one of those scrums, it stops. Generally. Not in every case, but generally players will start calming down because they realize that could lead to a power play, which can lead to my team being behind, or maybe your team's already behind and you could be behind by another. So it is a game that is called, I think the officials do the best they can, but keep in mind that game management gets thrown out. It's rare that you see 5 power plays for one team and 1 for the other. Usually they'll kind of even out. You're going to hear about even up calls. I don't like even up calls. I absolutely loathe even up calls. I understand why they're there. I've watched the game since 1981. I get it, but I don't like them. I don't like the idea that my team's going to be shorthanded now because they had 3 power plays in a row when they were legitimate power plays for the team I'm rooting for, or the other way around. If the team I root for takes penalties, I don't generally get mad about it. and then say, oh, good, now we've got a power play. But you'll hear announcers saying now they have to be careful when a team has 3 or 4 power plays and the other team hasn't had one yet. You heard, well, now they got to be careful. Now they got to play under understanding they will get the next one. And it is something that generally I think hockey fans want to see go away. There are some, though, that would say, nope, even up, you got to even it up. You don't want the officials to decide the outcome of the game, even though you kind of are if you should be giving out a power play that you're not. Or if you're giving out a power play that you probably shouldn't because you're trying to even things up. That's the referees helping to decide the game as well. So it's a murky setup in the NHL when it comes to the officiating, the officials, and the relationship that fans, media, coaches, players have with the way the game is officiated. But yeah, I don't envy the job. I wouldn't want the job, and it is not an easy thing to do. I'm hoping I got all the penalties. I'm hoping I got all of them. I think I did. If I didn't, I apologize. But for new fans to the game, don't worry. You'll pick them up relatively quickly. One thing that I've always found interesting is that there are those who are fans of the game that treat it like it's really, really complicated and it's really hard to follow. And if somebody's a new fan of the game, well, they don't know the game. It's not that difficult. It's not that complicated. And I think that people can pick it up relatively quickly. So if you're a new fan of the game, there you go. I know Utah's coming in this year, so I assume there will be some in Utah that haven't watched hockey. Plenty that probably have, but I wanted to do this, and I will be doing other Hockey 101 videos this summer. So stay tuned for those. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know any penalties that you think that I didn't cover. Because again, I'm pretty sure I got all of them, but if I missed any, you guys can let me know. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.